So I'm going to start this morning by reading you a little bit from Exodus chapter 20. If you want to turn there in your Bibles. This is the giving of the law. This is the giving of the Ten Commandments in Exodus chapter 20. And so the whole thing runs through verse 17. We may not read that much together. But it starts this way in verse 1. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness or anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth below, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. I want you to think for a moment back to when you were a kid, back to when you were a child. Think back. So not how you feel about being a child today, but how you felt about being a child when you were a child. What did it feel like? Did you feel like you had a lot of freedom in your life when you were actually a child? I know that if you're anything like me, the answer to that question is no. In fact, you felt like you had no freedom as a child because it seemed like everyone else was in authority over you. It was very rarely that you met someone that couldn't tell you what to do. Your parents, your teachers, the principal, basically any adult, and you felt like you had no freedom. Like you couldn't do what you wanted, you couldn't go where you wanted, you didn't have your own money, you couldn't drive yourself anywhere, you were totally dependent on everyone else. And then you had to go to school, you had to get up every morning and go to school, you had to do chores, which is just slavery, really, when you think about it as a kid. And, and so always as a kid, you were looking forward. You were looking forward to the day that you would finally be free. And so you would look forward to these landmarks, as you went through your life. The first time that your parents felt you were old enough and responsible enough to be left home alone, or when you first started being able to do things to earn money, either a job or at least like chores that you got paid for, or babysitting or something like that, so that you had your own money that you could spend on whatever you wanted. And then, you looked forward to being a teenager and getting your driver's license and being able to come and go as you please, and then eventually, turning 18 and moving out of the house eventually. That was our view of childhood as children. But something happens along the way as you go from being a child to being an adult. And I dare say that most of us now as adults, when we look back on being kids, go, man, I wish I was a kid again. Because when I was a kid, I got to do whatever I wanted. I could play all day, I could go run around, I could get dirty, it didn't matter. I had no responsibilities. I had to go to school, which, up until the 5th grade is all basically fun and games anyway. I had to do a few simple chores, and that was it. Otherwise, I just got to have fun. Right? We look back, and we go, that was freedom. So what is freedom? What does it mean to be free? I was reading an article earlier this week about a well-known writer from the 70s and 80s by the name of Hunter S. Thompson. Hunter S. Thompson. You familiar with this guy? You may not. Conservative Christian circles, he's not super popular, but he's well known. He's well known, and you may know Johnny Depp made a movie about him called Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which I've never seen, but it's about him. And the guy he did a lot of social commentary. He was very counterculture. And so he would oftentimes rail against the prevailing culture of his day. And a lot of people think he was a great writer and a great journalist and a great thinker from the 20th century. But not everyone agrees, oftentimes in large part because of his personal life. Because he had a personal philosophy that led him to do basically whatever he wanted whenever he wanted. So he was an alcoholic. He was very open about his drug use and abuse. And that was the type of life that he led, ultimately, really, and sadly enough, ending to his demise when eventually in his 60s he committed suicide and took his own life. And as I was reading this article, people were commenting on it, as they're wont to do on the internet. And some people were saying that he was great. They were huge fans. They just thought he was this great figure from the 20th century. And other people were saying no, and they were kind of pointing at his personal life as evidence of his lack of greatness. And his fans responded by saying things like this, like, hey, he was just free. And he lived his life free. He did whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. That was his philosophy. That's how he lived his life. Is that what freedom is? Is freedom simply the idea that you can do whatever you want, whenever you want, without any restrictions? Is that what it means to be free? I think historically, if you look back, that's not historically how people have defined freedom. Historically, people have defined freedom more along the lines of freedom of opportunity, the ability to come and go as you please, the ability to decide the direction of your life, the ability to self-govern, the ability to work the kind of job you want to work, to marry who you want to marry, to go where you want to go. That, traditionally, has been the idea of freedom, not the idea that you can just do whatever you want with no restrictions. Why are we talking about that today? Why are we talking about freedom? We're talking about it because in today's section, as we're continuing the story of Exodus, our series called Journeys, where we look at God's people going from Egypt to the Holy Land, and not just that, but going from being a people to being God's people. We come to the part today where God gives them the law. He gives them the 10 Commandments, and not just the 10 Commandments. I mean, the 10 Commandments are only representative of everything else that God does. There's chapters and chapters of laws that God gives them. Civil laws, religious laws, criminal laws, all types of laws that God gives them. Why did God give them the law? What does it mean that God gave them the law? A lot of times people look at things like the 10 Commandments, and they look at the laws that God gives, and they get a picture of God as like kind of a stern, angry person who's basically standing up in front of you going, You're not allowed to do that, you're not allowed to do that, you're not allowed to do this, you better do this. That's the view that a lot of people have of God, especially in the Old Testament, and of things like the 10 Commandments. That God is simply telling us what to do, literally lording it over us. And people don't like that. People don't like to be told what to do. We oftentimes reject that. I mean, I don't think kids use this expression anymore, but when I was a kid and someone was telling you what to do, particularly someone that you felt did not have the authority to tell you what to do, like a brother or a sister, what would we say in those situations, people of my generation? You would say, "You're not the boss of me." Right? You're not the boss of me. And that is our natural human reaction to being told what to do. You're not the boss of me. Is that all that the 10 Commandments are? Is the 10 Commandments and the law of God simply God bossing us around? I would submit to you that it is not that at all. Think about it for a second. What is this journey that they've been on? I have said over and over, I've even already said it once today, that this journey is not so much about going from one place to another place, but it's a journey about becoming God's people. Going from not being God's people to being God's people. That's the real journey that they're on. This sounds familiar to you, right? Because I've said it like every week. So you guys are, This is what it's about. So here, God has led them out of Egypt. He's freed them from Pharaoh, taken them across the Red Sea. They're on their way to the Holy Land, and God has told them, I will be your God, and you will be my people. So now, guess what? It's time to talk about what that means. I want you to think for a moment about every relationship that you have in your life. Your spouse, your boss, or your employees if you are a boss, your children, your parents, your friends. Think about those relationships and realize that each one of them has rules and boundaries that define it. Each relationship has rules and boundaries that define it. Your relationship with your boss or your employer says you will be at work on time at a given time. Your relationship with your spouse says you will be faithful to one another and remain in that relationship with one another. Every relationship has rules and boundaries. And that's what the Ten Commandments and the law of God are. God has led them out of Egypt and has said, I will be your God and you will be my people. And now he says, and here's what that looks like. Here's what that looks like. When we're in a relationship together, you're not going to worship any other gods. You're not going to make any idols or graven images. You're not going to misuse my name. And when you live as my people, here's how you're going to treat one another. You're not going to murder. You're not going to steal. You're not going to lie. This is what it looks like to be my people. This is what it looks like to be in a relationship with me. And when you go outside of those boundaries, you can break that relationship. If you cheat on your spouse and go outside the boundaries of that relationship, you can break that relationship. If you are constantly late to work, you can break that relationship with your employer or your boss. God lays out for the people what their relationship is going to look like so that they can stay in relationship with him, so that they can stay his people. The problem is, and always has been, that God's people have failed to stay within the boundaries of that relationship. We find it extremely, extremely difficult to do all the things that God has told us to do. But we are fortunate that that did not break our relationship with God, because God was faithful to us and sent his Son, Jesus Christ, to change the nature of our relationship with him. Jesus came, and he said once famously, I did not come to abolish the law, but to what? To fulfill it. I did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. And so, he did what we were not able to do. And it's a good thing, because if he had not, we would still be trying to live and define our relationship with God based on the law. When we define our relationship with God based on the law, can we stay in that relationship? Or do we fall? Do we sin? Do we fall short? You know, lately I've been doing a lot of, not a lot, but I've been doing some premarital counseling for couples that are engaged. And I love it. I love doing it. And it's very fun. It's very exciting to see people that are all excited about their relationship and their marriage. And the couple that I'm counseling now, they're in great shape. And they're really excited, and they have a really good, strong view of what their relationship is all about. But in my history of counseling people, that has not always been the case. And I recall that one time I was counseling a couple that was engaged, and we used this kind of survey that we have them take so that we can gauge sort of some things about their relationship. It's not a compatibility survey. It's not like Match.com or something, you know. And it's not meant to judge whether or not they should or should not get married. It's simply to get an understanding of what each of their views of the relationship are, and make sure they have the same view of the relationship and that view is realistic. And so this was years ago, actually, when I was still at Orlando Lutheran Academy, and I was counseling this couple that wanted to get married, and there were questions. The survey deals with different sections of their life and different expectations they have about marriage. Now, we're in kind of mixed company here with some younger members. So adults, I'm going to speak in code. So stay with me. You'll be able to follow me. So at one point, the survey addressed their expectations regarding how often they were going to watch TV together. And the man had answered that he expected that they were going to watch TV together every day, or even more. And the woman thought that they were going to watch TV together about once or twice a month. Now, these were radically different views of the relationship. How successful, were that to go unaddressed, how successful do you think that relationship would be? Do you think that would cause some issues? When you don't understand the type of relationship you're in, it's difficult to stay in that relationship. And so what type of relationship are we in now? God sent Jesus to fulfill the law. And that changed the nature of our relationship with God. So that now it is something different and something better. I want you to turn with me real quick to 2 Corinthians chapter 3. And we're looking in verse 1 through 3. And in this, Paul, the Apostle Paul's writing to the Christians in Corinth. And he's talking about how they are the fruits of his labor, you know? How they represent him in a way. And I want to direct you especially to verse 3 here. He says something that I think is really cool. He says in verse 3, "You know that you are a letter from Christ, the result of our ministry, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts." Not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. The connection there is obvious, that the tablets of stone are the law, the Old Testament laws of God, the 10 Commandments and all of that. And Paul is saying that, look, for you, where you find life, where you find your relationship with God is no longer on those tablets of stone, but it's where? In our hearts. That Jesus now defines our relationship with God, and he, through his Spirit, dwells within us, and lives within us, and lives in our hearts. There's an Old Testament prophecy that says he will take their hearts of stone and replace them with hearts of flesh. And I believe, once again, that's talking about the difference between defining your relationship with God through the law and defining your relationship with God through Jesus Christ. For us, our relationship is now defined through Jesus Christ. And that means something rather amazing for us. It means we're free. It means we're free. We no longer have to worry about whether or not we're going to break the relationship with God by not keeping the commandments. Because our relationship with God is not defined by the commandments anymore. We are free of that. Our relationship is defined through Jesus Christ, who gives us his grace and his mercy and his forgiveness freely. Now that creates a little bit of tension for us, though, doesn't it? Because as we were talking about what it means to be free and what it doesn't mean to be free, the freedom that Christ has won for us does not mean that we are free then to simply do whatever we want, whenever we want. We don't use our freedom as a license to sin. We don't use our freedom to simply indulge our selfish desires. The freedom that Jesus gave us is the freedom to become the people that he wants us to be. The freedom to live life as God's people. What does that look like then? What does it look like to be God's people? Last year when I was teaching confirmation, we do these testimonies. The kids do them at the end of the confirmation, and we, the mentors and pastors and stuff that teach them, give our testimonies along the way. And so I was giving my testimony, and I was telling them how I used to be, for a while, a probation officer. And so then the kids got in a good-natured, but little debate about whether or not I actually look like a pastor. Because after I told them that I used to be a probation officer, some of the kids said, yeah, you don't look like a pastor anyway, you look like a cop. And then some of the other kids were like, no, I think he looks like a pastor. And then the first kids were like, no, man, he looks like he should be carrying a gun right now. And so then one girl popped up and said, he looks like a pastor with a gun. What does it look like to be the people of God? It's got nothing to do with anything of outward appearance, but it's got to do with something that is written on our hearts. One last verse I want to direct you to. It's the Gospel of Mark, chapter 12. It tells us this. One of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked him, of all the commandments, which is the most important? The most important one, answered Jesus, is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this. Love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. The answer to what do the people of God look like? The answer to what difference does being the people of God make in your life? The answer to how do you live your life as the people of God? The answer is love. It's love. You love God and you love one another. Not because you have to, not because God's going to punish you if you don't. Certainly not to earn God's favor or to prove yourself worthy, but you love because that's who we are as the people of God.